Hi everyone, welcome back. This is episode 5 where we're gonna review energy availability. This is the last dimension of measuring the availability of your battery energy storage system. And we're gonna mainly look at how you would incorporate energy in the other availability types that we discussed in previous videos. So energy capacity is a bit different than like your other availability where you're measuring like a proportion of equipment on or off or the ability of an equipment to produce energy at a given time. The energy capacity is actually can't really go away on its own unless the equipment is not available, but that's already covered by things like equipment availability. So really like the installed capacity, which is like your battery capacity, the overbuild, what's above your contracted value, these things change very slowly over time. And at beginning of life at COD, we're going to have an installed value. So if you were to do a capacity test, we'll call that the installed capacity. And we'll have a contracted value or guaranteed value, which is always a lower number. And that contracted value, depending on the type of design of your plant, could be the same value for every year for the life of the project. And you might be augmenting your energy capacity by adding batteries, or it might just degrade over time. So the guaranteed energy capacity every year is lower, but there will always be a difference between the contracted and the installed, and hopefully it's always above, meaning you got over 100% of your contracted capacity. If it's not, this is where this dimension of energy availability is going to come into play in our calculations. So we reviewed like the three primary types of ways to measure the availability of your BESS. The equipment availability, that's your equipment online or not. And we look at this from a battery rack perspective and its ability to actually deliver. The operational availability, it's your ability to follow set points. One of the weakness of this type of measurement is you can only measure it when you are dispatching the system, the BESS. So you only for a few hours a day able to measure this. But it's important in case the other signals don't capture the unavailability, and it's pretty easy to measure. The third one was the power availability, which is a metric that you would compute at any point in time to define how much power can you deliver to the grid. And this gets kind of layered on top of equipment availability as a way to capture imbalance. So if you got half of your system that's half of the battery that are empty, then you can only deliver 50% of the power that you would be 50% available, even though there's still energy left in the battery. So that's a way to measure the state of balance and its impact on the availability to deliver power. So with this kind of tree, you're pretty well covered with like making sure that your equipment is balanced, it's online, ready to deliver power, and then kind of all the controls work. So if there's a set point that comes in, you're able to respond to it. But if you add a larger problem in terms of the capacity to store energy, and even though your plant is fully operational, you can deliver the power, but there's actually the batteries have degraded beyond what you were expecting, then you would have an energy shortfall. Might not materialize into a power problem, so you might not be captured by any of the three previous availability methods. So layering this energy availability is going to allow us to, if there was a fleet-wide accelerated degradation, to kind of capture that. So the granularity of this measurement is pretty high. It's gonna be megawatt hours. So the accuracy is pretty high. We'll do a measurement of what the capacity is, and then we'll compare it to the guaranteed value. The coverage, well, this will apply to every interval, so it's pretty good coverage. The only challenge is like we can't really measure it often, so it will be only updated when we do a capacity test, and we'll discuss this. But the idea is like you do a full capacity test of your site and readjust this energy availability. And obviously it's got a few blind spots because capacity tests are often like base case scenario in terms of how you charge and discharge. Maybe the way you dispatch your plants, you're not able to operate in the same conditions, then you might not be able to use the entire energy. It'd be up to you to make sure your capacity test is representative of how you're going to operate the plant. So the energy capacity is a fairly slow changing signal. Your energy retention doesn't change overnight. So it's okay to measure it with capacity tests once, twice a year, or if you suspect that there is a shortfall, something is gone wrong. Offline strings don't reduce the site capacity. So this is kind of something to always consider when you report available discharge capacity or state of charge is if the equipment is offline, let's say it's faulted, would you say that the capacity is available or not? Or the state do you count it in the state of charge? And the answer should be kind of maybe, because maybe the equipment is offline at this interval for the next 10 minutes. But if it was to come back online in 10 minutes, you would have plenty of time to kind of use that energy in the next discharge if it's in the middle or early in the discharge. So the equipment's availability doesn't directly or right away affect the energy capacity. And that's why we don't want to double count either. So if a string is offline, we won't be reducing the energy capacity. It'll be just an availability event. So we really don't want to double count. Same with the power derate from state of charge imbalance. That obviously reduces energy, but it's also already captured by the power availability. Set point shortfall from reduced capacity. Let's say you had some imbalance and reducing capacity, you would capture this as an operational availability. We don't really want to double count this. Real-time measurements of state of charge are really unreliable. It's really hard to estimate the available discharge capacity. This change over time. You could change from cycle to cycle based on how things are balanced, how much you've charged them, and then how many maybe downtimes you had. If you had a few unavailability events in the previous cycle during the charge, then you're going to have an impact on your energy retention. Do you want to count this into your calculation? Maybe you can recover it depending where you sit. And then if you are not going to be performing a full cycle, maybe it's not going to be a problem if you get the chance to recharge. So it really depends, and it would be quite a bit of I think double counting if we were to try to keep track of the energy capacity at any point in time. So the idea is like we're only going to do this with capacity test as a kind of slowly changing kind of dimension. And this is an example of a capacity test just to illustrate a little bit what you typically do during a capacity test. This is the charging power, so negative power, and then discharging as a positive power here. So you would first kind of fully charge the site, and then you might get to a point where you got a charge power taper where not every battery gets fully charged at the same time, but you continue to charge to kind of fully balance the site. And this energy here, and it's often included in the capacity test, this you might not always be able to charge in normal operation, because in normal operation, you might get to this point here and then stop. So you'll have to keep that in mind is if you're able during your charge to actually do this kind of taper here and control your set point based on the available power and fully charged, and you're likely going to be always able to extract a bit more energy because you've charged a bit more. And on the discharge, when you do a discharge, you would count kind of all the energy until you've started to derate your power as the full power discharge capacity. This is typically like the number that we would be using as the test result from the capacity test and comparing it against the guaranteed. But there's always a bit of energy in the tail here that also was potentially available if everything was perfectly balanced. So just keep that in mind when you design your capacity test and compare it with the way you're operating your sites. So the energy availability would be the energy tested divided by the guaranteed energy at the point in time, and then expressed as percent and never greater than 100. percent. Now you'll have to keep in mind that we typically availability guaranteed energy are typically like adjusted every year, and they will kind of step down maybe every 12 months. And then they're often not linear. They're just like on the first anniversary of your operation, your commercial operation date will just drop down to a new value. So this is kind of important to keep in mind, as if in this example, we do a test here, we're all good, but you see right away the guaranteed value is much lower. So, but we all good, but we retest a year later and now we're much closer to the guaranteed value. And there's always a steeper kind of step on the first year. And then everything seems good, but then there's 1 year here, year 3, where we actually fail the test. But there's only a few months left in the operating year. So we only really below the guaranteed value for the remainder of the year here. And when we get to the year end, the guarantee actually drops. So then the guarantee drops below the last test value. So then the energy availability becomes unread again. You'll have to update this energy availability maybe every month, or you could do it based on the exact date where this guaranteed energy value might change over time. And then you can, let's say you're fixing, replacing some strings or some packs or whatever you're doing to make things to recover the energy, adding batteries. When you're done and you think you have the capacity, again, you can redo a test, and then hopefully you're above the guarantee, get back to 100% energy capacity. So you must layer this into your overall availability guarantee, or the way you protect yourself from performance loss. This could be fully separated from the availability guarantee, or combined, like we're presenting it here, as a another dimension in your overall battery effectiveness. So this term overall battery effectiveness came from the kind of play on word with the manufacturing industry that use OEE, overall equipment effectiveness. And it's really you take the 4 different availability: your equipment availability, your operational availability, your power availability, and your energy availability. And for each interval, we're going to do the minimum of each of them. If all the equipments are 100%, there's no operational shortfall, there's no power shortfall, the energy availability is 90%, then your overall battery effectiveness will be 90%. And then so on and so forth. But if the equipment availability drops to 70%, then 70% becomes the overall battery effectiveness, even though if this is 90. And this should be evaluated through a few different scenarios. And I think what's the most important is that eventually you might have a penalty, a liquidated damage rate associated with every percent of shortfall. And you want to make sure that this is proportional to the damages that the plant is experiencing if there is different type of unavailability. So this was kind of maybe a shorter one. Energy availability is not really something that's typically used for BESS availability calculation, aside from the way I explained it here, where it's just like a slowly changing kind of factor that if you have a failed capacity test, then you would apply this ratio to all your intervals. In the next video, we'll talk about how to automate and calculate these different availabilities using a Python notebook, SQL queries, different methodology where you could actually easily compute these ratios, create daily reports, weekly reports, and actually track track each of them, so you can really understand which components of the system is causing the unavailability. So we'll see you in the next video.